Welcome to Byju's IAS and welcome to our weekly review of international affairs, in which we try to focus on an issue which is of relevance to all the aspirants for civil service examinations, and also it is important in the context of India's national interest, in the context of changing power relations in international politics. And this time what we wish to discuss with you is a very important topic which the world seemed to have forgotten about for the past some time, and suddenly we are alarmed that events are taking place which are warning us towards a crisis which might explode in our face. What we are talking about is the lurking threat of Islamic terror. Now, Islamic terror is looked upon two ways by different people. Some think that it is Islamophobia of the Western Christian world, which sees an Islamic terrorist threat where it doesn't even exist. Islam is a religion of peace. They are fighting for their national identity, pride, etc., ethnicity. But on the other hand, there is a steady rise in incidents of violence perpetrated by those who have an affiliation with an Islamic terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or ISIL, which makes it very difficult to neglect this anymore. Recently, there have been suicide attacks in Shia mosques in Afghanistan, in which hundreds of people have died. There have been attacks on UN personnel. There have been people taken hostages in northwestern African countries. School kids have been taken hostages. Lots of people have lost their lives in wanton violence. So this is an issue which cannot no longer be dismissed as something which doesn't concern us. Terror, international terror, Islamic or of any other shade, concerns us all, and the world neglects it only at its peril. This is what we shall discuss at length this time. Within a week, there have been 2 suicide attacks in mosques, Shia mosques in Afghanistan, in which over 100 lives have been lost and many more have been maimed, injured critically. And this has once again focused attention not only on Afghanistan, on the instability in Afghanistan, but on the very real threat of ISIS or ISIL, call it by whatever name they call themselves, by Islamic Emirate of Khorasan province in Afghanistan. But this reminds us that the threat of ISIS or the Caliphate or the Islamic Emirate, give it any name, has not been vanquished. The Western world thought that they had eliminated this thorn in their flesh when ISIS was defeated, not decisively, it appears now in hindsight, in Syria, and their strongholds in Mosul, etc., were destroyed, and Baghdadi, who claimed to be the Sheikh and the Emirate, the Khalifa, was killed. But then these groups splintered and they scattered all over the place. Some came to join hands with Taliban in Afghanistan when they thought they would conquer Afghanistan more easily, so very uneasy partnerships were formed. But at the moment when the Americans wanted to buy their way out of Afghanistan, they also talked in terms of good Taliban, bad Taliban, but that's a different issue altogether. They also turned a blind eye to the partnership between maybe the suspected elements of ISIL who now were claiming to be part of Taliban, and it was very difficult to distinguish between the two. This was one part, but this is not only Afghanistan which has shocked us into this stunned discovery that ISIL is very, very much active. There also have been repeated attacks in Nigeria, the Boko Haram. Again, what it did is been active. They abducted 160, they killed 160 people in a raid, they abducted many more, and the same kind of a pattern is repeated in the neighboring Burkina Faso. So this group, we'll talk about this group a little later, but this is what has again said. The people estimate that over a past 6-7 year period, thousands of people, close to 20,000 people have lost their lives in these actions of Boko Haram and its allied groups, splinter groups, and also almost 500,000 people have been rendered homeless internally or have been pushed across borders in a neighboring country. The loss to property is immeasurable. Briefly, we see that there are 3 stripes in the African continent where the erstwhile splinter groups of the Islamic Caliphate, Islamic Emirate have regrouped. All of them claim to have allegiance to Al-Qaeda, which was Osama bin Laden's original terror group, internationally very fearsome, which launched the regime change warfare in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq after the World Trade Tower attacks. But that is so much far back in past that people have forgotten what the horror was 2 decades back. But what people have to live with in the African continent is that there is a strip, let's say the northern tier, where you have Djibouti, where the Chinese are safely ensconced and have a naval base, but just adjacent to it is Somalia. And Somalia has another group which calls itself Al-Shabaab. The names keep changing. We shall discuss this point again and again. The names are changed conveniently to give the impression that one group has been defeated, eliminated, but it is like the sort of self-perpetuating monster, an amoeba or a bacteria or a cancerous cell, which is very difficult to kill, and it seems to regroup and join hands again and become a life-threatening, cause a life-threatening emergency. So in Somalia, there has been a group which is Al-Shabaab, which effectively controls the country. There are repeated attacks in Mogadishu in 5-star hotels where journalists stay, where foreigners stay, where relief workers stay. There have been attacks on the presidential palace, and there have been attacks at the topmost people in the army command, in the intelligence command, and it is suspected that these people have supporters within the establishment. Somalia is well known to have been a failed state, but it is almost a nursery for terrorists, a sanctuary for terrorists. It is notorious for its piracy. Only last week there was a Chinese naval ship which had to fight off the piracy attacks off Somalia's coast. This is something which people must realize, that Chinese who have a naval base in Djibouti next door are not immune to pirate attacks. So they are so desperate. The poverty is so acute that they can mount an attack even on a Chinese naval ship. This time they were fought back. In past there have been other incidents. Now, unfortunately, in other countries next to Somalia, adjacent to Somalia, also the political instability is very high, which allows Islamic terrorists to go across the border, regroup, disguise themselves as partisan fighters with one tribe or the other. Take the case of Ethiopia. Take the case of Ethiopia, which has been fighting a long-drawn civil war with Tigray. It is basically a tribal conflict. But the tribal conflict is not without potential for Islamic terrorists to claim that they are supporting one tribal group against the other. They are freedom fighters, so to speak. They are liberating. And Ethiopia, let's not forget, is a country which has long history of the presence of Christianity there. So whether it is Christianity, whether it is Islam, the practitioners of these two orthodox religions take different forms in different countries in Africa. But the fact remains that this disturbed situation also gives the potential. Then again, you come to Sudan. Ethiopia has a conflict with Sudan, southern Sudan, with its neighbor a little distance away, Egypt. Now, all these may be related to some other issues like the Renaissance Dam and so on. But the point which we wish to re-emphasize, and you must understand it clearly, is that wherever there is political instability, wherever the central government is not in a position to control or assert its sovereignty over its entire territory, these areas become potential nurseries, sanctuaries for Islamic terrorists. Now then you come further down and you have Libya, where in Libya, call him a supporter of terrorists, call him an extremist, zealot Islamic person, but as long as the dictator Gaddafi was there, he was a bulwark of sort of not letting splinter, stray groups of challenging his authority in Libya. But the Americans got him assassinated, and after that left behind a trail of political instability, and now you have in Libya a government which is at times backed by Islamic fanatics and who turn again a blind eye towards Islamic terrorists. So you have the northern tier all the way in Maghreb, where there is this problem. The second problem is when you come to the northwestern tip of Africa, you again come across, we mentioned Boko Haram in Nigeria in a passing manner a little while earlier, but Boko Haram is a group which is totally opposed to Western education, modernization, forget about secularism, Christianity, etc. So books are haram, that's how it got its name. They are against knowledge. They have been accused of perpetrating inhuman barbaric crimes like female genital mutilation. They have been kidnapping school children. But then again, Burkina Faso might appear to be a failed state, a small state, incapable of asserting its sovereignty over its territory. But what about Nigeria next door? Nigeria is oil rich. It is the most populous nation in Africa. It is a large tract of territory. Why does it have to be so helpless in front of Islamic terrorists? This goes back again to another argument that probably all these countries have never emerged as modern states. They are corrupt states ruled by elites who owe their primary allegiance to tribal origins where they come from, and because of the large scale corruption, the money which they earn, the country is supposed to earn for its development through oil or mineral resources, is spent on the whims and fancies of a corrupt elite, and even the armed forces are not paid regularly. So their morale is low, they have not been paid, their logistical supplies are often interrupted, and they also have primordial tribal loyalties of their own. So ever since the Biafran War way back in the 1970s in the 20th century, Nigeria has also suffered from the ethnic divide, the religious divide, the regional imbalances, and of course lawlessness of the army. Now if you keep this in mind, you would see that there is also a spillover effect. There is a group which calls itself Islamic State of the West African province. So it is like the Khorasan province near Afghanistan, which comes, it is a province which they carve out in their own imagination. So it also at times overlaps with the Islamic State of the Sahel region. So the two names are very fluid, the two identities are very fluid, they keep changing, merging into one another, and you have the whole northwestern coast of Africa all the way down to Sahel, south of Sahara, whether it is Morocco, whether it is Benin, whether it is Ivory Coast, whether it is Ghana, nobody is immune. Now if you take the northern tier and the northwestern tip, there are several other countries which fall into this trap of being vulnerable. They fall into a trap in the sense the trap is made by their own leaders, the trap is made by corruption, the trap is made by the world not bothering about the ISIS threat as long as it is not suffering from its direct attacks at the moment. So the victims are in Afghanistan, the victims are in Burkina Faso, the victims are in Nigeria, the victims are in Niger, the victims are in Chad, Malawi. This is the belt which joins the northwestern African states, comes almost to the southern tip of the Maghreb and runs all the way till Sudan and Uganda. So all these countries have borders which are not very clearly marked. During colonial period, the nation states had emerged out of colonial empires where ethnicity is an issue, where tribal loyalties are an issue, and where of course the resources have been exploited by multinational companies. So in international relations, often enough we talk about blood diamonds and working of multinational corporations, but you see that this is what the scene in Africa it is in the northern tip and also in the western coast. Now the spillover continues all the way till the heart of Africa. It comes to Democratic Republic of Congo, it comes to Republic of Congo, it comes to Rwanda, Burundi, it comes to these countries which are not as lawless as some in the northwestern tip of Africa, but they again have a sort of credibility crisis with their people, and poverty and the riches are not used for the company. Now all this, if it were not enough, you also have the eastern coast of Africa where you have the Mozambique, where you have the Islamic groups working under different names, holding oil refineries, oil wells to ransom, kidnapping foreigners, kidnapping international aid workers. Now this has happened in the sense in the past couple of months there have been repeated instances of either UN observers getting hurt, becoming casualties, relief workers not being allowed to go and work either in Somalia or in Ethiopia or in Tigray region, and this has led to a situation where external intervention cannot be unimaginable for some time to come, because so far the world has shut its eyes to whatever Islamic Caliphate or Islamic terrorists were doing elsewhere. But events in the past fortnight have warned us that unless we look at this, the regrouping might be dangerous for the rest of the world, even beyond the confines of the African continent or beyond Afghanistan, elsewhere. it is time to take a look at the European presence or the American presence or the international presence, military presence in the African continent, and whether it has been effective or not, and how it has triggered the revival or resurgence of the Islamic terrorism. First things first, do we start with the presumption, very ill-founded, that the people of Africa or the people of West Asia or the people of Arabia or Afghanistan are themselves and only themselves responsible for the birth of Islamic terror? Isn't it a fact that the Americans, ever since the incidents of 9/11, have retaliated in a manner totally disproportionate and with a mindset that it is a resurgence of crusades, it is a conflict between civilizations? And when President Bush was very angry, he said, we shall not tolerate an attack on our homeland, we shall not let a piece of paper, meaning international law or treaties, stand in our way, we will punish those who have perpetrated this crime on us. So there was a unilateral military intervention which was given the facade of a multilateral intervention by asking a few allies to join in. It was not under UN auspices, but it was a NATO command multinational thing, and some countries outside the NATO also joined the American hands. This led to a very pernicious doctrine of the regime change, and this regime change from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya created an atmosphere which could only end up in anarchy, instability, and communal disharmony. So in Libya, Gaddafi in Libya was looked upon as a supporter of terrorists, but he could control the terrorists he funded or he supported. He paid a heavy price for that, but he was a bulwark against rogue elements, and he of course was a rival of the other pole in the Islamic world of Saudi Arabia. Now, the Americans have had this problem with the Iranians. When the Iranian revolution took place, Islamic revolution, they were totally oblivious that they were Shias, they were on a divergent path from Saudi Arabia or even Libya, but they thought that all Muslims were just one monolithic bloc, and first there was a almost open warfare against the Iranians, then they tried to have Iranians and Iraqis fight amongst themselves, then they had the Gulf War, then they patronized the Saudi Arabs, and also the Americans playing both sides, an autocratic ruler in Saudi Arabia who was supporting the Wahhabi Islam, the aggressive form of Islam, the Salafi version of Islam, and was the rich billionaires like Osama bin Laden were closely related to the royal priestly family there. So we must look at the roots of this. Now, once the ex-American president says it is a crusade, it is the conflict of civilizations, it is a war to finish, which will be fought outside the international legal restraints which are on warfare, then how do you blame the other side for retaliating in similar manner? This is not to defend the Islamic terrorists. This is only to have an open mind to examine various things. We talked about the various Islamic groups, but what about the armies of Lord in Africa, which are supported by the Christian agencies in America, which are protecting the so-called Christians against the Islamic barbaric hordes which descend on them. So you have this problem, and let's look at the presence. France has close to 5,600 soldiers in African continent at the moment. United Nations has probably distributed various locations, similar number, 5 to 6,000. The United States also has about 2,500. Now the trouble arises when the French president makes an announcement that he is going to reduce the number of French soldiers present. So this is thinly disguised blackmail. This is thinly disguised blackmail in the sense that this is an election year. He has been criticized for spending so much money in distant African battlefronts which do not necessarily further any French interest, is a quest of glory which is very expensive. But he also wants to say that I'm strong, I'm hard, I represent a secular democratic republic, revolutionary republic, and I will not put up with Islamic superstition, terrorism or zealotry. But whatever the signals are mixed. Because if the French withdraw or reduce their soldiers from Sahel or where they are posted, the Africans would be left to the mercies of their own armed forces, not very competent, their own governments which are corrupt and also incompetent, and also the rebels which are being utilized by the Islamic terrorist groups. So that's one. The United Nations unfortunately operates under a system where there is the Security Council, where there is budget crunch, where is only the voluntary contingents of member states which are being made available for the peacekeeping forces or observation of peace. Again, there are a number of people belonging to non-governmental organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières or the Red Cross, committees of Red Cross, to provide humanitarian relief. Now, the problem is the access of these non-governmental organizations depends on a government of a particular state or a multinational security force which can provide them protection to discharge their duties. So, whether it is COVID vaccines, whether it is food to avert famine-like situations, whether it is to save malnutrition children or displaced people because of climate change, drought, etc., all this has been severely interfered with because of Islamic terrorism. Now, once again we say Islamic terrorism because there are other forms of terrorism, but the world is seeing more and more terror attacks which can be traced to adherents of Islam, converts to Islam, or who have been brainwashed to mount suicidal attacks. Some of them are former Christians, some of them are whites. Take an instance of the Dane who recently in Norway took out a bow and arrow and shot 7 people dead in this primitive barbaric form of attack in Kongsberg, a small peaceful town. Now we come to know that this person had converted to Islam a few years back. Now the police says that he was under their radar, he was on their radar as a possible terrorist. Now it is open to question, why did they not take him into arrest, why did they not take better precautions? But they would say that this is a problem in Western countries, in Europe especially, in the affluent European countries. They value their liberties very much, they don't like police surveillance, and if you do not have enough surveillance, if you do not have profiling of a potential terrorist, if you say there is Islamophobia which leads to this, then you end up with these situations. There was another very dastardly attack less than a week back, as we speak, on a British member of parliament. It was the second member of parliament to be killed by an extremist. The first one was killed by a Brexit protester about 5 years back, but this time a man stabbed a long-serving British member of parliament in a church when he was meeting his electors, and police has come out with a statement that this was a terrorist-inspired attack. The way of assassination was stabbing, it was a lone wolf attack, it was maybe a suicide attack, the person maybe was, it is very difficult to argue that every time this kind of a lone wolf attack takes place, like a driver drives through a crowd in Spain or in France, in a French Riviera beach, or a French school teacher is beheaded brutally in front of his students because he had dared show a cartoon of Hazrat Muhammad the Prophet in his class, which seemed to offend the religious sentiments of a person. This person again was a person who later on you say mentally unstable, mentally disgruntled refugee, jobless, having problems in matrimonial life. All these are post facto explanations. The fact remains that there is a connection which is rooted and traced to a person who has been inspired by watching these videos of the ISIS brutal assassinations. Maybe it's a psychopath who is let loose. Now, of course, over the past couple of years, there have been many more such instances. There have been the attack in a church in New Zealand, there has been an attack in a church in Sri Lanka, and in all these cases, you have a person who's either owing allegiance to one of these Al-Qaeda splinter groups, or he has become, he has brainwashed himself by watching the propaganda material which is there. There have been issues of young Britons, young French, young Spaniards, young Americans traveling to these countries, becoming Islamic Mujahideen and coming back, ruining their own lives and lives of other people, and now claiming the right of repatriation to their original country, and this is a different issue altogether. But then when we look at this, we cannot be oblivious of the fact that there is a rise in religious intolerance. One thing leads to another, there is a reaction. If there is an Islamic terrorist attack on an innocent target for something which is totally permissible within the law in that country, and you abuse the right of asylum and as a refugee, then there is going to be a groundswell against a whole group. So it might be the tough stand which Macron takes in a presidential election year in France. It could be Britain's trying to say that, look, we have had enough, we are not going to put up with this. You would have a spillover effect elsewhere. So you might, after Angela Merkel, have a rise of a new Nazi pushback against the more generous policy toward refugees. You might have, let's not forget that even before this Dane did it in Norway, there was another person, a neo-Nazi, who had killed more than 100 people with automatic rifles in Norway itself. Now the problem is that Norway and Sweden are supposed to be very tranquil places, very rich places, very comfortable with themselves, but they also are, shall we not say xenophobic, but chauvinistic people who believe in their own superiority. They live their own lives, they have their national identities, and they are not very favorably inclined towards foreigners who disturb their way of life. So we'll have to keep this in mind, that Europe is being troubled by a variety of problems, including European Union weakening, the East European countries pulling in a different direction, but this Islamic threat makes it very difficult for Europe and America to not to take a hard look at the problem of Islamic terror. This is all we have for you this week, but before we say goodbye, we would like to end with a word of caution. It is a very inflammable subject when we talk of Islamic terror, because we try to relate a religion with terrorism. Now, terrorism is a crime against humanity, which is not an exclusive monopoly of any one particular religion. Islam, like other religions, is a religion of peace. It doesn't advocate killing of innocent people. It doesn't support or encourage suicidal attacks. Suicide is a sin in Islam, and of course allows tolerance even of those who don't believe in Islam after they have paid tax, after they have accepted to live under a certain restricted regime in an Islamic state. Now all this has gone for a 6 in recent past. Whenever we see explosion of Islamic terror, innocent people being made victims, political leaders being stabbed to death, people worshipping in a church or in a minority Shia mosque being blasted to smithereens by suicide attacks, we have conversions, we have very brutal images of beheading, stabbing, executions put on the internet. These are to inflame passions. So there is no monopoly of Islam in this. You have Buddhists, non-violent people in Myanmar, not even the army general, but the monks who have been perpetrating genocidal violence against the Muslims, Rohingya Muslims. No two questions about that. The Hindus, as a reaction to communal violence elsewhere, have tried to take it out on the majority of Muslim population, which rendering them suspect that their sympathy, tell them to go at a drop of a hat to Pakistan, go to Saudi Arabia, and not to worry, not to think about it, that the majority of them have nothing to do with the aggressive form of Islam which is being extended. You take Bangladesh next door, they are all having a problem of an export or an import, call it whatever you may, of an aggressive Wahhabi Islam from Saudi Arabia. The Americans make peace with Saudi Arabs. The Europeans make their peace with Saudis and UAE. That's where the money is. But they live in peace with the arch enemies of Iranians and the Saudis, the Israelis. They can normalize their relationship. So Indians will have to look carefully in future and think how to manage their own affairs, how to let not their economy recovering from COVID go to waste, not to make provocative statements to alienate next door neighbors who have been friendly to us, be it Bangladesh. And also we have to learn to live with Pakistan, who has taken an irreversible step of Islamic fundamentalism and playing with fire, riding the tiger, unable to dismount it, and it has so far not lost the support of either godless atheistic China or Christian Americans. So Indians have to be careful. We are a secular state, we are not a theocratic state, we don't carry our religion on our sleeves, we practice our religion, we have coexisted happily, but don't be misguided by whatever you see in the press. Try to verify your information from a variety of sources, read different experts' analysis, try to reach your own judgment, and more important than anything else, don't be swayed by emotional passions and your own religious prejudices. That's the only way to analyze international relations, especially a very explosive subject like Islamic terrorism. So till we meet next week, thank you and goodbye.